Did you manage to watch that ContraPoints video?
Half of it, yeah. My kid actually was like, "Oh, I totally know who that is," and has already seen the video, so that was good.
We're,
But the
we're
beginning of it,
recording,
I
guys.
think, was
Poor Nick.
oh,
He's gonna do
hi.
like an intro and everything.
Oh, right.
That's perfect. That's our intro every time.
There
Just
we go.
Art saying something casually.
Right. That's my. I didn't realize we're firing it up. That's my bad.
No, it's totally fine. Okay, so welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast. It's been about 3 weeks since we had one, something like that. I was on hiatus. So in any event, today we're going to be talking, our primary topic is going to be cancel culture. It's been in the news. I know a lot of people have really strong feelings. Unfortunately, today I'm the only center, right, left person here. And so these guys probably have very similar opinions.
No, I don't know. I've never heard like three leftists agree on anything, to be honest with you. So
Excellent point.
I still don't trust Art. I think he's gonna like at some point steal all my information and like
Right.
sell my soul.
Exactly.
So-
No, and that's what we do is we we sort of agree and then we immediately like go after each other. So
I think it's important that that we start out defining it, obviously, and because cancel culture, I think, can be a whole broad array of things. But I think that's probably where I want to go with this, is just to sort of apply it to whatever, right? I consider cancel culture to be the taking down of statues, I think we lost Heather.
oh,
Yes. I'm assuming
canceled.
cancel culture. That's right.
Canceled Heather.
Wow.
There she is. Hi, Heather.
Uncanceled.
There you go. The situation that happened, I don't know if you guys are up to date on it, with the Harper letter. So
I have that pulled up.
Yeah. So that was a recent event where a bunch of center left people signed a letter, or even further left people signed a letter, and have been strongly criticized by other people on the left for it, about free speech. That I want to actually read something I posted earlier that for some reason was really controversial. So this was a tweet that went out by a woman that I've never heard of named Philippa Sue. And this tweet ended up getting just about 200,000 likes on Twitter. And I found it to be what I feel is the most troubling part of cancel culture. And she said, cancel culture. If you were canceled but do not wish to be, you must work to earn back people's respect by owning up to the thing that canceled you in the first place, listening to others, educating yourself, and advocating on behalf of people that you have offended or harmed. So if you go to that tweet and you look under it, oftentimes, obviously, there's threads explaining different things, putting it in context. There was no contextualizing. And again, 200,000 people is sort of a lot of people. So my response to that was, this view is inherently assumes that all people who are canceled are guilty of the sin that they have been accused of. It also assumes that all people who are canceled are wrong about whatever view or action they've committed. It's akin to saying that if you're accused of a crime, you must face the consequences of the accusation. And then I asked, explain how this is different, and actually Art responded to this, and it was actually a pretty good response, how this is different than something like McCarthyism or the Salem witch trial mentality. So we can sort of start with that. Art, if you want to go, because you've already seen this, and I'm assuming thought about it a little bit, and then we'll kind of go around and see what everybody else thinks of cancel culture.
Okay. So just to kind of redefine it real quick, is that we're talking about two different things, which do sometimes overlap, but often don't. So on one sense, you have what people broadly call cancel culture, which is really just being criticized and held to account. And when we have kind of social mores that have changed and shifted over times, a lot of stuff that even 5-10 years ago was totally permissible is now outside the bubble of what popular culture, of a center left bent will tolerate. you're now getting these kind of aggressive, kind of pushback against people who now hold views that are outside what is deemed appropriate. And we can talk about whether or not that's appropriate, but in one sense, we're just talking about criticism. In the other sense, cancel culture is an in-group elimination where you have this kind of gatekeeping where, let's say, for instance, like the ContraPoints video that we were talking about, or I was talking with Heather right when we started. So ContraPoints was talking about being canceled by others within the trans community and or attempted to be canceled. And you kind of had these, kind of a no true Scotsman sort of an element within any community where they're like, it's a very essentialist. If you are not this, you are not with us. And that's a little bit different. I mean, this is kind of a thing where if you don't uphold a certain standards within your community, they say you are no longer part of us and you're kind of excommunicated, from the high church. You're no longer, you didn't uphold our values and you're basically an enemy, and they're going to dig up all kinds of stuff. And like you were saying earlier, the assumption will be that you're guilty. The assumption will be that anyone that you talked to, their sins are your sins. And it's a very kind of an insular reaction. So we do kind of blend these two lines together between just being criticized. Like there's a lot of people who signed that letter who are just rich people that just don't like having bad things said about them. And it's kind of like BS and I don't really care. But you'd also do have this element of like this really weird, like extremist holier than thou attitude of these in-groups where if they think that you're not pure enough, they're going to kick you out of this group, even though in the grand scheme of things, like you could be like way deep in their corner. But if you're not quite deep enough, if you've got a little bit of heresy in you, then they will turn on you, and to kind of like one up you, they will, find reasons to kick you out just on purity grounds. And, they're overlapping concerns, and, I can see why people often mix the two. And we use the term cancel culture to refer to different things which are not necessarily the same, but it is across the board. No matter what you're thinking when you say cancel culture, it is an issue within our society. It really just depends on exactly which issue we're talking about with any given person who is canceled, and then for what reason.
So, yeah, I agree. One of the distinctions I wanted to make is, so you have a lot of these videos coming out right now. And so I have like a real problem with some of them. So you have these people going into like, I don't know, restaurants or Walmart or something, and they're asked to wear a mask and they act ridiculous and they flip out and they say that people are trying to control them. And somebody videotapes them and then it goes viral, and, this has a huge impact on their life. And so like, I really feel like that could get out of hand really quickly. And I feel like often what happens with situations like that is that the consequence for their behavior is not proportional to their behavior. And, but I also think that it is sometimes. So like the woman in Brooklyn who was walking her dog off the leash or whatever it was, and somebody said something to her, and then she tried to get it was an African-American guy, and she tried getting him arrested, right? And you saw her on video acting out how she was going to, get this guy in trouble, like she was being, assaulted or mugged or something like that. That to me would be okay to videotape that and have that go viral and try to deter that behavior in the future. I just feel like as a society, we need to be able to, there are consequences to having the level of technology that we have, et cetera. I just feel like we need to be able to kind of look at these situations reasonably and not just say, okay, whatever goes, because this can really destroy somebody's life. And we all have bad days. We go to the store and sometimes we're in a bad mood and somebody says something to us. I know me, right? And like, I can be reactive sometimes, if you can believe it, right? and like, if I went to the store one day and, 15 years ago, and somebody said something to me at the wrong time, on the wrong day, I might do something really stupid and it might make me look awful. And if somebody had videotaped that, and it could have had a severe impact on my life and really, maybe affected it in a way that was irreparable, who knows? But I just really think that we need to consider some of that stuff, and maybe not, So that's it.
Yeah, I got some ideas.
Bring it. What do you got?
Absolutely. So activism is about bringing awareness to whatever small minority of a disenfranchised group is. And there's no bigger activism than trying to call out some of the most powerful, richest, most privileged people on the planet. I mean, if you can't hold to account our public figures, the people who put themselves out there, the people who like to make the idea that they represent how the morality of society is going to go, if you can't hold them to account, then who can you? And when are we actually going to be able to see these disparities actually, justified?
So what do you mean? Who are
I
you
mean,
talking about? Like what?
I'm talking about anyone in the. We cry over these public figures as if like it's going to ruin their lives. J.K. Rowling is an actual billionaire. Her life
Does
is just
being a
fine.
billionaire somehow make you like not have rights or not have?
You want us to cry because people don't want to buy any more of her books right now because they want to stand with transphobic people. I mean, or against transphobic people. I mean, at that point, you're telling the people who don't want to participate in that commerce that they have to, that they don't have the free right or the free will or the free voice to say, hey, I don't want to participate in this. And if enough advertisers are like, okay, well, that our audience isn't there, they're going to pull their ads. That is just a law of supply and demand. Cancel culture doesn't actually exist. It's just pure capitalism at its finest. People don't want the product won't be sold to the people.
Well, this is kind of my point that I was saying a minute ago, is that we're talking about drastically different things. Like
Yeah, we are.
what Nick was talking about is like, you think about just some random person who's out living their life and you cut somebody off in traffic. It turns out that they're black. Like this just happened in New York. And the guy is following around with the camera like, I'm going to make you famous. And it's like literally following her around and it went viral. But, and she was basically begging like, no, please don't do this. Like there's a lot of stuff that could go on in anyone's daily life where if they cut and section a part out and there's no context and suddenly you're presented as this certain type of person, maybe that's totally fair. Maybe you got rolled up and maybe you got busted and now you got to own it. Or maybe it was something totally out of context. It's not what it's looked at, but when it's presented in this weird slice, then there's no context. You're just told to hate this person and you do. But that's what Nick was talking about. But like what you're talking about is a very, very public figure who writes words for a living, who said words for an effect, and now she's getting butthurt that people are judging her on her words. And when they try to express their own right to expression, people are saying, oh, well, doesn't she have rights? Well, of course she has rights. She instigated this by saying words, which she does so well, she made $1 billion. And now those words are coming back to bite her a little bit. And suddenly we're supposed to feel bad for her. That's drastically different than what Nick's talking about. But they're both lumped under cancel culture, which is what's so fascinating about all this is that for some reason we've decided to call these things the same thing. But if you think about it, they could not be more different. Like some person who's just in the supermarket that doesn't want to wear a mask versus J.K. Rowling, who's a literal billionaire for writing like wizard books, couldn't be more different. So it is kind of weird that we're talking about this using the same catchphrase.
Yeah, but there are other aspects to that too. Even if it's someone who is like famous or has a lot of money, we've completely canceled them for things that they said, or did back in a time when times were different and we weren't yet at a place where it was acceptable. And I think there's a truth to judging someone based off of something they said 30 years ago by today's standards. I think we have to sort of accept that it just was different. I was a different person. Oh my God, I wouldn't have a job doing what I'm doing right now if I was completely judged on my own past. And it may even be that my current employer would pick up one of these podcasts and listen to me and say, oh, hell no, we can't keep her employed, as a teacher. I just think that it's reasonable to want to have a space for discussion and a space for mistakes. And I think it's wrong to completely just quote unquote cancel everybody without wanting to educate others on what was wrong about what was said or what was wrong about what was done. We really pulled people through the ringers. There was something that a favorite music artist of mine did, Lana Del Rey. She did something in a music video and got this huge backlash from people over something she did for an African American or something somewhere. But it wasn't African Americans upset with her. It was the white community upset with her. And it was really
I remember
stupid
that.
because
I posted about it.
yeah, you did. Yeah, but her whole music career is based off of her idolizing nothing but Black female artists.
Right.
So I think that video you and I watched, I keep forgetting her name, I'm sorry.
ContraPoints.
There we go. She touched on that about how, and I'm losing my train of thought, yay. How we, I'm going to stop. I'm going to digress because I lost my train of thought on that one.
I actually agree. I actually agree with Heather on this. I don't judge people on their past actions because my past actions were not all that great either. But you know,
we are. A lot of this cancel culture is doing just that.
But I judge people on their current actions and their current voice and their current views. That's how I judge people. Right now, I'm going to stand with my friends and support them until the J.K. Rowling has a different view, or they're just not going to buy her product anymore, and that's the way it's going to be. I mean, because I know them on a personal level, and they feel disenfranchised by it currently, right now, by something she's actively doing right now. That's way different than saying, hey, you know what? In the past, I had this view, and I put it out there publicly. I'm recanting that because I've learned and I've grown as a person. Those are two totally different things, completely.
Sure, but we also have this gigantic group of people who are ready to vote for Trump again, and we all know that there's some sort of like disinformation that they live in that allows them to continue to vote for him. They're lacking like the real historical context of things like the Confederacy. They're lacking a lot of like the nuances of PC culture or wanting to rename things or, replace statues around the country because they don't have that context. And who are we serving if we don't allow the conversation to happen? Who are we serving if we just say, oh, F you, you're bad for that. F you, you're bad for that. It's like calling everyone a racist when they're not all racist per se, but there's something about what they're doing that they just don't get the connection to. I don't think we can have that conversation if we just come across being overly aggressive about this. Hi, Nick.
But yet I'd rather spend my money. I'd rather spend my money with people who already are.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, totally. Exercise your mighty dollar. That's not going to go away.
This is my point. We're just not giving oxygen anymore to people who are offending other people. It's just not. It's not worth our time.
I feel like we're all talking about different things, but I feel like in general, with all of these things, there seems to be an acceptable level, or at least I feel there's an acceptable level of outrage or an acceptable. There's an I think we should, that it's okay to tear down Confederate general statues, or I'm at least okay with it. I don't think it's okay to tear down Frederick Douglass's, right? I think it's okay to,
he wasn't for trans rights.
Do we even know who tore that down?
But that's sort of the point, right? Like we have to be able to talk about the situation. And I feel like with J.K. Rowling, like she says this, and then it's just this Twitter mob that goes after her. And and I don't feel like we're having a conversation anymore. It's just, she's a bigot, that's it, and who cares?
Can we be honest about J.K. Rowling for a second? She's been doing this bullshit for years. Well, she'll come up with some crazy controversial stance on something or just try to change something in her lore just so she can get attention herself. Okay? She knows what the fuck she's doing.
Are you really angry with J.K. Rowling?
Well, and let's just take that like another step further, is that like, we use a lot of terms to just decide we don't have to listen to someone. Like we say, oh, she's a TERF. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what that stands for. It's some kind of, it means if you're a feminist who believes that women are intrinsically female and that, any type of transgender, movement into a female space or a woman's space is basically, canceling out, true women's, experiences and all that. So
Mhm.
whatever you want to think about that, it's extremely common. So the idea that, you know, you can simply discount her opinion as being a TERF really discounts the fact that a lot of like the transgender inclusivity into our modern culture is very, very new. And it's a lot of times very limited to certain circles. And that doesn't mean that the rest of society is bad. It just means that they don't know yet. And they're, you know, it's an educational and kind of a social cultural progression. It's happening, but it hasn't happened everywhere. And it's not necessarily fair to expect that people who don't necessarily live or breathe in these circles should already be educated on this stuff. And if you think about how quickly this has moved compared to the decades that it took for gay rights, gay marriage, civil unions, even like Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military, it was a very long process to move. So trans stuff is moving very quickly. It just hasn't hit all parts of society. And unfortunately, people like J.K. Rowling, who you think would be better read and better experienced, you are going to find these bubbles of resistance where it just hasn't quite hit there yet. But rather than screaming at these people that they're terrible, it would make, I think, better use of your energy to try and educate them and move them along and say, hey, you know what, we actually agree on most things. And rather than just trying to cancel you the F out and just say, hey, you know what, since we don't agree, obviously you're a bigot and should go to hell. I think that for a lot of these people, they're kind of on the edge. They're kind of persuadable. And it would be, you know, much more beneficial to try and work with them and try and guide them along. But unfortunately, there is that cancel culture set who's just like, well, check the list. She's not on our side. Out.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah,
problem.
exactly.
That's, yeah, I think you articulated that well.
There's another side to that. You know, that kid Milo Yiannopoulos, and he likes to go around.
Kid,
to
he's
college
like 45. He's like my age.
Oh, all right. Well, hey, kid.
All right.
You're still older than me, but I'm going to call you kid.
That right?
You know, he likes to go to these colleges, and Berkeley was one of the most infamous, where the protests against him to go there and have these speeches that he does was completely, it worked, and it kept him from having his, you know, speech. And he goes and he claims to be a comedian, and he claims to be, you know, just there for fun and to make fun of everybody and to provoke, you know, interesting thought. And he's a proponent of free speech. But he really just goes overboard for far too many groups of people. And so they never, ever give him a platform. And I got to thinking, you know, someone like that who gets the backlash of society, he's going to have his free speech, and then people are going to, you know, backlash and have their free speech. And so I think that's just the thing that's going to happen. But then we come to Trump. And I don't think that people in power like that should currently, not in their current state anyways, have so much power to just say whatever the fuck they want. I think it's really important that he's ultra responsible about his words and inclusive, because what's happening is he has this gaggle of followers who takes what he says, and it's really destructive. It's destructive towards others. Like when he called it the Chinese virus, there was an uptick in racial injustices against Chinese Americans, and he had to actually come out and say, hey, these are Americans as well.
But how would you go about policing something like that?
I mean,
how would you change it?
Policing the president on his rhetoric?
Unless you vote him out. I mean, you know,
right.
his poll numbers, right? But
right.
That just doesn't, I mean, Trump.
It's weird because that's why his base loved him so much, was because he was just this cannon who would say whatever they were thinking in their minds. And I thought, oh, haha, hilarious. But it's not so funny when, you know, actual bad, horrific things are happening. They can't take a joke. They take it where it's not his sarcasm. You know, there were lot of other examples of his stuff too.
Right.
Not just the Chinese virus, the bleach and disinfectant, an uptick in New York happened where poison control was called like 18 hours after he said, oh, inject yourself with disinfectant or bleach, blah, blah, blah. And then an uptick in, hey, poison control was called a whole bunch after that. So
let's not even go there. There's a
he just needs to be really, really careful with what he says. And I think it's okay to expect that of the people that are leaders.
Why are you laughing?
They're not leaders of just this little bubble. They're leaders of the entire nation. And I think that's like where the whole statue thing comes in. It shouldn't be this representation of this little bubble in Southern pride. It needs to be this representation of all Americans in all stripes. But that's just
So just to be clear on the injection stuff, the statistics on that were actually skewed a little bit in those reports.
okay. Good
So,
to know. I have more examples.
the calls to the poison control centers had been increased since January anyway, and it correlated with COVID-19 and not
Oh, I got you.
necessarily with what the president said. And in fact, one of the articles that came out, I think from MSNBC, had said, that this happened like 2 weeks before the president even said that.
Okay,
So,
well, that's good. But there's still other instances like the hydroxychloroquine situation. You know what I mean? His words have had a lot of weight for his faith,
Sure.
is what I mean.
I mean, I think the general point that he's super irresponsible about what he says and that his words have generally have consequences is totally true. And I completely agree with it. I just don't think that there's anything short of voting him out that we could possibly do. We can't cancel Trump, which we could. We sort of can.
We can on November 3rd.
tried. Trump derangement syndrome right here.
There you go.
Guilty, proud.
So I'm interested to know why Art was laughing hysterically.
Oh, I hate to even admit this, but she was talking about Milo working at colleges, and just randomly it occurred to me, well, yeah, he likes him young.
Right. So if you didn't know, I don't think she knew about this. So
Okay.
Milo had gone on a podcast or some sort of radio show, and he had made a comment about how a priest molesting a 13-year-old boy or something like that wasn't that big of a deal. And he related it to maybe one of his own personal experiences. And that's when his career sort of went downhill.
Yeah.
Now,
No, I did.
I think that's
read about
perfectly appropriate. Like that to me is the positive side of cancel culture, right? I think my problem is cancel culture run amok, cancel culture that says, people are guilty before we even know context of what happened, cancel culture that, judges people harshly for things like you were talking about they did 30 years ago that weren't necessarily that bad 30 years ago that today would be unacceptable.
So, and I think that's an interesting distinction, is that we have some people who were taking out of context. And I think all of us realize that, like, man, like I say all kinds of crazy stuff all this time, where if you took that totally out of context, it could sound horrible. And if you took a couple of those, you could make a terrible picture based off of a couple of things were taken out of context.
Correct.
But when we're talking about Milo was in context. Like that, there was no question what he was talking about. He told on himself at great lengths. And then you talk about like J.K. Rowling, like other people, like a lot of times when we talk about these people getting canceled, it's really because they articulate in context terrible ideas, and then they get held accountable. And there's a certain sense of these, celebrities, wealthy,
Okay.
connected,
Yeah,
who
but-
say things that are bad. But then on the other hand, we lump that in with these people who are like in a supermarket or like in a car, and you get like 20 seconds of their life with no context. And you're just told, hey, this person is this based off of that video, go.
So I think that's a great point, and I don't want to take away from it because I think you're absolutely right. But there's a huge difference between J.K. Rowling's maybe
Oh, absolutely.
unwoke, position on transgender people and, Milo, whatever his last name is, position on
Yiannopoulos.
molesting children, right?
Yeah. No, drastically different. All we're saying is that there's kind of like a sliding scale of things where we're like, at a certain level, like, yeah, like cancel that dude. Like, seriously, like if that's what you believe, get out. Like, seriously,
Right.
Nobody wants to listen to that. And then you get into other territory where it gets increasingly more controversial, and it's still questionable if they should be canceled. But then you get into these areas where there's like no context. It's just a clip. It's like viral video where you just shown it and you're told to think something.
Right.
And that makes sense. Oh, go ahead.
I remember the first time that that cancel culture actually came up as a conversation where I was involved. And what was the name of the guy from Seinfeld that was in the club and he yelled the N-word?
Oh, Richard.
video.
Kramer.
Kramer.
Well,
Kramer.
yeah.
The guy that played Kramer. Yeah. And I remember that that point, it wasn't even that much of a debate. I mean,
Oh,
it was videos start going viral at that point. It's like one of the first viral times that we started canceling somebody from our culture, and not like you. And then Mel Gibson would be the next time, of course. Michael Richards. So I mean,
Can we
thank you.
cancel Tom Cruise next, please?
well,
Yeah,
I mean,
but
I mean, Mel's back though. I mean, he's been getting
Yeah.
like award nominations. He's been directing. He's been acting. Like he got kind of canceled from a certain
Yeah.
segment, but like, dude, like that guy's still rich. He didn't get kicked out of Hollywood. He just like had a couple of years where it got slow, but man, that guy's cranking out movies and directing jobs now.
Right. So this
Yeah.
isn't an entirely new phenomenon, right? I think
Yeah.
that the problem is it's just become more intense. And part of that is because of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the Salem witch trials for sure, where this whole group thing takes over and then the mob comes and, we see if people float or not.
And that's the concerning part of it, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I do.
So,
I do.
so I don't know where Art went, but I think we can kind of
I think
transition.
we canceled him.
Did we cancel Art?
He got canceled.
Canceled Art.
There we go. So
Go ahead.
I wanted to transition to another topic real quick,
Okay.
Okay.
unless you guys had more to say, which is fine.
I mean,
No, it's fine.
I know you have more to say, Steve.
sometimes.
So I just wanted everybody's kind of position on the current situation, well, not situation, but current election, where you guys think things are headed. My position has changed slightly since the last time I had this conversation with Art.
Oh,
But just wanted to kind of see where you guys were at. Who's
I
going to
think-
win?
I-
Where do you
I
think
think
Trump's at? Where do you
Biden.
the
I think
Senate-
Biden's gonna win by 12 points, yo.
What is
That's
that?
pretty,
Elf-
pretty bold.
On average, per state, I think he's gonna win by 12 points.
Okay, so
Wow.
that
I think he's going to barely squeak by.
but you think he's going to win nonetheless.
I think he's
I
getting blown
do.
out. I think Trump's blowing him out.
I
Trump's
do.
sinking so fast, so fast.
I just don't see anything with the COVID situation or the economy getting any
Schools aren't
better.
gonna
I
open back up.
only see it getting worse, and I think that's going to negatively affect Trump. And
What about
I think
Kanye?
We're all
people
gonna
are
run out.
starting to
We're all
worry.
running out of.
Or
Kanye's
Paris
not a real
Hilton.
issue.
Paris Hilton's running. I'll vote for her. Just kidding.
No, but seriously, like all kidding aside, what about Kanye?
So Kanye's not
What
actually
about
running. it.
Kanye. Kanye's
Well, I
gonna
mean,
get a
he
weird bunch of
registered.
people who never vote.
Yeah, but he didn't register on time in a bunch of places. From what I
6.
understand.
He's got 6 states he can't run in.
Okay. So he can't
We're
run. I don't know
fixing
what
po-
those 6 states are, but it's probably important.
Yeah.
He'll pull from Trump.
They're all important. It's like Ohio, Florida. It's like all the big ones.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
who
he
cares?
can't. Yeah,
I mean,
Kanye's going to get a weird new group of people who don't normally vote. He's going to get those young kids who come up to his shows who don't normally vote to register and vote for him.
I
and
think
he's
the
also gonna
concern
pull a
is
little bit from
reasonable
Trump.
that if he takes African American votes away from Biden, that he could potentially, because in certain places. But I just have a feeling whatever he's doing is just gonna. I mean, he's legit, pretty
you
crazy.
saw his platform. It is cuckoo banana pants. It's a birthday party. Are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah, it's a joke.
Right now,
But again, like
come on.
if it wasn't for Trump, we wouldn't even entertain it. But then you look at like this like game show host that then is now president. So I would
Right.
more than anyone, I'd love to just look at this on the surface and go, well, obviously this is a joke. Like this is not real. But unfortunately, a significant amount of
underestimate it.
Americans are down for this kind of joke. Like the people who are
Does he have a
occupying-
base? Does Kanye have a base?
No, I don't think he has a base in the way Trump did. But the only reason I'm even willing to entertain this, even though it's idiotic, is the fact that there are so many idiotic Americans. It doesn't take many to swing an election, especially when it's one that could potentially be this tight. Now, I actually agree with Steve that I think that it's going to be a blowout. But when you introduce someone like Kanye, even if he only pulls 1%, 2%, if it's in the right places, I mean, Trump only won by 70,000 votes. And if you think about the states he won in, those margins were actually smaller than the write-in numbers. Like they're saying like Ohio had it's like 50,000 write-ins or something. And then like his margin of victory was like, I don't know, like less than that or half. There's a couple states where like, if you look at like Pennsylvania, Michigan, like the number of write-ins even if he's not on the ballot, Kanye could potentially poll some tens or 20 or 30,000. And if it's like 2016, as insane and stupid as it sounds, it could actually matter. Now, I don't think it will. I would
No,
bet against it.
I completely agree with you. I
Yeah.
think he has name recognition. I think it's going to be, my personal opinion is it's going to be much closer, even if the polls are at where they're at right now.
Mhm.
I think it's probably much tighter in those states. It's historically much harder to poll statewide, especially in some of those swing states. Polling is really bad.
Right.
And they still haven't adjusted for that. And the number one issue in 2016 is they didn't adjust for education.
Mhm.
And so Nate Cohn talks about this in the New York Times a lot. So I just think that we shouldn't get too ahead of ourselves. Biden is consistently ahead in the polling. It's looking pretty good for him, but we still have a long time till the election.
Yeah.
Literally anything can happen.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance that some of the polls aren't necessarily accurate. As far as, but I do think he's probably in a position to win right now. I think you'd have to be kind of crazy to think that he's not, although it's not the only scenario that could play out, right? As far as the Senate goes, I had listened to one of our podcasts a couple of times, and there was a point in that podcast where Art said that it was he used this phrase, highly likely that Democrats win the Senate.
Yeah, that was hyperbole.
Yeah, that was hyperbolic. Okay.
But I mean, if we were just talking about gut instinct, I
Yeah.
think that you're looking at a couple of different senators who are vulnerable. And if, let's just say that Trump continues to not act like an adult, and especially as this issue kind of wears down, at a certain point, your coattails like invert. Like if he was doing great, he could be dragging these MAGA people along with him, or even people that were on the fence that would kind of go, and maybe tilt that direction. But you have these people who, like, let's say like Susan Collins in Maine or wherever, who are marginal people who are in very purple states that took kind of a bit of a risk, assuming that Trump would stay popular. And she sided with him more than she didn't. I mean, she's not like any kind of hardcore MAGA, but there's a number of senators who are in these very vulnerable seats, or at least competitive seats, maybe if not even vulnerable, but ones that just could go, where if Trump stays true to form and he keeps screwing up and keeps screwing up and keeps screwing up, anything could change between now and the election. That's 100% true. But if nothing changes and Trump just keeps being a screw up, that's bad for them. Like if Trump really goes down and people decide, hey, you know what? Like the restaurants are closed again. We were supposed to be through this. The schools didn't reopen. Like the restaurants are closed. Like the joblessness is like going through the roof. Like we're mad at Trump. A lot of those people are going to take it out on their senator too. So I do think that there's a danger that, yeah, anything could change, but if it doesn't, because Trump doesn't change, because he can't change, because he just is who he is, by the time we get to the election, a lot of these people might just be like, we need to do something else. They might not even be thinking that deeply what that is, but they just might go down and just like, no, let's just try something else.
Susan Collins.
But that's only the small percentage that we see are dropping from his, his popularity polls.
Yeah, but it doesn't take much in a swing state.
I mean, that's true, but I just don't see anybody in his base caring about any of that, except for that very small percentage of, when he goes down and, how popular he is at the moment.
I don't
Yeah,
think
but
his base isn't enough. I don't.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Is solid for a base, and it's extremely large for a solid base. But I don't think that's going to win him Michigan and Pennsylvania.
He is not. Have you guys seen the Lincoln Project ads that have been going out lately?
They're so good.
I mean, they're just so vicious. And I mean, they're being played.
That? Never Trumpers, I know.
Yeah, but that's straight up George Conway.
He's part of that, yeah.
Yeah, like he's one of the main guys.
His daughter's on Twitter now.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that dissent from that part of the Republican Party is not coming back to Trump, no matter what.
I mean, that's like Steve Schmidt, Rick Wilson, George Conway. Yeah. I think John Weaver, something like that. John Weaver, maybe.
John Weaver. He was a
yeah.
advisor for McCain.
Right. So it's basically those guys, but they're, the Democrats don't really have the kind of, I don't want to say the balls, but like they don't really, maybe let's say the huevos or the cojones to really
They
like cut, to cut a bee like these guys will. And they kind of like are hitting him from the inside. I mean, they're not necessarily like Trumpists, but they're Republicans, and they're able to, I guess, kind of hit him in a different way that, I don't know, like if the Democrats had that kind of fire, I mean, it'd be a one-party state in America. Like they just.
Why I've been saying the Never Trumpers have a lot more power, political power, than we give them credit for.
True.
They do.
Didn't Bush recently say that he was going to vote for Biden? He endorsed him.
No,
Bush-
from what I
Bush Jr.?
remember, that was there was some speculation about it.
Oh, okay.
And then one of his aides came out and said, we haven't said who he's going to vote for. But yeah, I mean, George Bush does not seem to be a fan of Donald Trump. He doesn't really come out and say things specifically about him, but when he talks about the country, he often says things that imply that he's not a fan. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, can't imagine why.
did you vote for
Romney, too.
Art?
Huh?
Did you vote for George Bush when you were a conservative?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
You did.
Yeah.
Wow.
Twice.
So you're technically responsible for the Iraq War, the recession.
Oh, all of it. Yeah, yeah.
It's great. It's nice.
You
When
have
did
all
you
this
switch over, Art?
self-loathing going on over that.
Well, I mean, my self-loathing is a lot deeper than that, but yeah, certainly. I mean, that's the 2010s was a complicated time as far as, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was way less complicated than I thought. But no, I was very like across the board standard issue Republican for the 2000s, and I actually didn't vote in 2008. I thought about McCain. I thought about Obama. I decided, like, I hit this weird thing where I'm like, I was over the whole Bush, like, Republican thing, but I didn't want to do anything else. I kind of thought about, like, Libertarian. I don't remember who was running back then. And I got busy that day. I just didn't do anything. I do kind of regret that. And then, but yeah, that was kind of probably not until the last 6, 7 years that I stopped being that libertarian apolitical. And at that point, like, libertarian is just a way to say, I don't care. You're just like, well, they're not going to win, but I could still be engaged and pretend and all that. Like, and even like the whole Ron Paul thing, like I was very lightly into that, but even then it was obvious.
I would have thought you were a big Ron Paul guy.
I was, very like light. Like I kind of got it, but on the other hand, like I'm like, but this isn't going anywhere. Like this is just it's just like I kind of like the whole, like the liberty, the Constitution, like that angle, but it was also struck me as empty filler. Like there's no there, like the whole edit or audit the Fed, all that. There's nothing to it. Like you could just kind of tell that, okay, yeah, in principle, it'd be great if we were very politically engaged. We cared about spending. We cared about, good governance and all that, and keeping it limited and just like on track and all that. But those guys, like especially Rand, like that guy's just a social conservative who just has like libertarian backwards. Like I don't even know what his deal is. And,
Awful. He's like one of the worst people.
He really is. No, he's terrible. He's awful. And like that whole thing kind of just poisoned the well. I did like Gary Johnson though. He's actually just a decent person. So like I was kind of okay with him.
He's a doofus.
We also canceled him. What is
yeah,
Aleppo? We canceled him.
Yeah, he's a doofus too. But
all right. So
no,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, but nothing. But I mean, long story short, yeah, in the 2000s, I was, kind of like a country club Republican, just a very standard issue. Like, well, I generally feel that like low taxes, like low regulation on business, rising tide lifts all boats kind of a thing. Like it was just a very broad.
It's weird to me, because somebody as thoughtful as you would be that type of Republican. Not that they're.
I was raised into it, so just I kind of.
Makes sense.
I mean, if you have it like a quick sec, like even for the like we're talking about cancel culture and like old views. Like I had somebody coming door to door one time when I lived in Baltimore, and she, was an activist with a clipboard, knocked on my door and said, "Hey, we have a ballot measure for gay marriage, and we want to know if you'd support it." This was like 20 years ago. And I was like, "No, but thank you." And she goes, "Could I ask why? Do you have a minute?" I'm like, "It was at the end of a long day. I didn't want to have some random woman in my house telling me I'm a bigot." Da 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 da. I'm like, no. And she looks at me and she goes, well, no, but like, what are your reasons? Like, why would you not support that? And I'm like, you know what? Honestly, it's been a long day. Like, I just want to talk about it. So I close the door and my girlfriend comes over and she goes, who was that? I'm like, well, it was an activist for gay marriage and all that. She goes, what do you say? I kind of thought about it. I go, well, I don't know. Like, actually, I don't even know what I said. Like, I just kind of didn't want to talk about it. But I thought about it. I'm like, wait, what are, like, because I kind of like politics even back then. I'm like, what were my reasons again? Like I didn't want to talk to her because I didn't want to have this random woman in my house just like, you know, call me names. But on the other hand, I'm like, but I'm actually pretty good at arguing stuff. And like, why would I not just want to like tell her my reasons? And I thought about it. I'm like, wait, I do have reasons, right? Like I've got reasons. I thought about it. I'm like, oh, I actually, I don't have reasons. Like I don't have any good reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to that. That's what happened to me once I got online. Like a lot
Yeah.
of things I believed in weren't really, I hadn't really thought them through as much as I thought I had. And
Yeah.
once I started kind of putting it out there and talking about them, they started changing. So
And that's the trick, I think, with a lot of what we talk about with cancel culture. When you don't give people a chance to grow, you just smash them for being wrong. You know, for some people, you'll just make them afraid. They just won't talk about it. Other people, they'll like go the other direction because like you take like the weird like fascist undercurrent. They don't care if you're flawed. Like they don't even care if they get 10% of you. If they get 10%, they'll get 20, they'll get 30, they'll get 40. Like eventually they'll just suck you in. Like there's no purity test with the right wing. Like they don't give a shit. Like as long as you're at least willing to talk to them, they'll just like lure you in. They're like, yeah, let's keep talking. Let's keep talking. And the left was better when it was more like that, when it was less about purity and more about, hey, no, please come in. Let's keep talking. Like that's the kind of thing where like you build movements, like you build people who are open to listening.
right. There's a lack of tolerance on the left that's disturbing.
Yeah. But you actually, in a weird sense, there's a lack of tolerance on the right, but it's different. Like if they think that you're like open to being persuaded, they don't care if you're pure or not. Like they just want to get you into the pipeline. They're just like, no, please, this way. Like let's keep talking.
Right.
So sadly, the left has lost a lot of that. When they were really on the underground, they were a little bit more open, maybe. But I think now it's, you know, now that the left is more ascendant, they're a little bit more restrictive as far as who they let in.
Yeah.
I think part of what our problem is on the left is, you know, like Black Lives Matter, for instance, there was, you guys all know the famous book, To Kill a Mockingbird. That book in particular keeps getting bans all over the country. And so I looked into it, and it's mostly Black families calling the school districts and asking them to stop reading this book with their high schoolers because of the racial slurs that it uses. But the whole message of that book is amazing, and it has to do with, you know, the racial accusations that African Americans would endure just because a white woman said so, which is kind of the whole, you know, Karen thing that goes on, like with the woman in the park with the dog and the man was, you know, taking bird pictures.
I'm much more sympathetic when it's African American saying,
So
I think,
am I. But
yeah.
as someone who loves literature and academia, like I have a hard time with that. I don't think that we should be taking those things out of academics. I think we should have that conversation. I think we should make education a very safe place to have those conversations. But I think because I'm on the left and I really want to support the movement and the cause, and I don't think that as a white woman it's my place to have that platform, half of me wants to just shut up and listen, but the other half says, you know, this is a little bit too far. We need to keep things like this, and we need to have these really uncomfortable conversations about things.
It's a very tricky balance.
It is. It
I
is.
have a
And
hard
I think
time
that's part of what cancel culture does.
Right. So I did want to address one more thing before you guys go to your other stupid podcast. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Bill Boswell is a very, very good guy. Chuck, not so much. No, I'm just kidding. Chuck's great. Hopefully at some point they can be guests on my show, or I can be a guest on their show. Afra too. I hear Afra goes on there sometimes. In any event, I did want to address the one topic that we had talked about, and I was very harsh, as I can often be, And I think in this particular instance, probably too harsh. And then I looked into it and I was like, wow, I might be kind of wrong here, but my point still stands. And that was about how you and Steve identify yourself politically. So there's this thing called left libertarianism, and that's how Art identifies himself and Steve identifies themselves. And it's actually been around for a long time. And I think the debate really comes down to what exactly is libertarianism? How do you define it? And my definition is I feel like a pretty widely accepted definition, which is, government has as little as possible role in individuals' lives. I think, when I think of a libertarian, that's what I think of. I often think of them as being, Republicans or right-leaning. I do think there's an obvious contradiction, and I know that there's an argument against this, and the argument just, it doesn't process in my brain. But it seems ridiculous to say I support universal health care, but I'm a libertarian, or I support universal basic income, but I'm a libertarian, or I support universal daycare, getting paid for, but I'm a libertarian. So that's my position there, and I wanted to give you or Stefan over there opportunity to. I'm just kidding.
Was that a Molyneux joke?
I'll follow Art on this one.
An opportunity to explain why I'm incorrect.
I mean, we need a lot longer than 5 minutes, but like just to
You
really
guys can take your time. I got nothing
Okay.
to do.
Okay. But just to like really basically throw it out there,
Yeah.
If you think about like your, classic like XY axis of like authoritarianism, libertarianism, just that, the axis. So with authoritarianism, and people have, for instance, talked about cancel culture as authoritarianism. You think about the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and then they talk about in America, we're having a cultural revolution. So those are authoritarian concepts where you basically aren't given the chance to think about what you think. You're being told what to think because some elite, somebody in some position of power has decided, hey, this is the right thing. And what I was talking about earlier on this similar topic was that, when Chairman Mao decided, hey, you know what? Our country is uneducated, it's backwards, the elites don't respect the workers, the men don't respect women. Like there's all kinds of problems here that I'm just done with it. Like we're just gonna have a cultural revolution, like all these old things from our old culture, I'm just gonna wipe them out. I'm gonna tell you what's up. And he wiped out old culture. They killed a lot of people. They sent a lot of people to go work in camps to kind of break them down. And then they kind of reformatted everything. Now, whether or not you agree with that, that's an authoritarian approach where you say, hey, you know what? From top down, we're going to have, whatever, like, even in America, you'd say gay rights, trans rights, we're going to get rid of Confederate statues, whatever. If you just decide that the mob or the people or whoever are going to rise up and just like push everything aside and just say, hey, this is what's up, you're going to do it or else. Maybe it's for your good. Maybe it's bad, but it's authoritarian. So when you're talking about like what you're saying with like, like free healthcare or, UBI or whatever, that's not an authoritarian thing. That's just a service that the government's providing and you do with it whatever you want. They're not saying, hey, you need to believe this, you need to think this, you need to do this. They're just saying, hey, this is a service. It's like a road. You want to drive on the road? There's a road. You want to go to the doctor? You go to the doctor.
I want to I just want to ask a question.
Okay.
Real quick, so I don't forget. So if you're accepting, so my problem with that particular argument is that if you have, if you're getting all of these different services from the government, you're eventually going to become dependent on the government, which gives them a certain amount of power over you.
You're dependent now.
You're dependent now, but I mean, if they're providing you healthcare, if they're providing you daycare, if they're providing you some sort of income, right? And then, I mean, I just feel like it gives them more power. to be authoritarian. And the more you allow government to control your life, the more power that they have, and therefore the less free you are, right?
Oh, well, yeah, but I mean, our freedoms, unless you're rich, our freedom's an illusion. Like, if you're poor in this country, you don't actually have any functional freedom. So, I mean, you have, like, on paper, you've got, like, this pretend freedom, but the only real free people in this country are the ones that have the resources to live as they choose, and that's it. Anybody who doesn't have the right resources, live as they choose, you're just somebody's slave, or you're somebody's wage slave, or you're somebody's, like a serf.
But that's not entirely true. That's not.
Yeah,
I think you
but
have.
neither is it true that you're dependent on the government if you're getting healthcare from them, because you're basically getting it from them now, one way or the other. Like, you basically have these different structures in place where none of us are like entirely, we're not like wild animals running around. Without the structure of the United States government right now, we'd be fucked, like, incredibly. And people don't like to admit that, because we like to pretend that, like, we're all free and just like living off of our own wits and resources.
It gives them a more direct way of controlling more people.
You
And a
see,
more
hold on.
direct way to sort of. What? Go ahead, Steve.
Let's let Steve get in.
Let me jump in for a second.
Yeah.
So one of the big issues I have with this argument in general is the fact that we're trying to lump in what we see as services, as well as like how we are supposed to like act in society. Those are two different things. The government telling me what I can and can't put in my body, telling me what I can and can't buy at a store, telling me what I can and can't do. That's completely different than me agreeing as a society that we want healthcare that's more streamlined, that we want lights that are actually put up
But
correctly.
if they're the
that we want
ones
streets that are
providing
done well
things,
planned.
they're the ones that can regulate them.
Nick, there's gonna always be some kind of central control, because we can't
The
sit there and
more-
vote for every little
The
bolt
more
that gives
dependent
every
you
little
are on
brown
them,
in
the more
ground.
control you give them.
All left-wing libertarianism is just realism. We are realistic about what we need in society and what we need to function to actually be able to do what we want with our lives. That's all it is. It's us deciding what services best serve us as a whole, as opposed to us going out and trying to pick out every bolt to put down in front of my house when they're putting down, when I need something to put down like a pathway. So we don't have all different pathways, colors going down the road, or so that I can actually get from here to New York on one road without having to like find like a pay ferry somewhere to take me around
I get there's
some river because no one could build a bridge.
Go ahead.
Oh, Heather in the back.
Aren't you gonna sorry guys, aren't you gonna raise taxes in order to provide all of these services though? And aren't libertarians like staunchly against like raising taxes?
No, you guys are still thinking about only Americanized libertarianism as a party and a structure. You're not thinking about it actually in a political science term, because libertarians everywhere else in the world think just like Art and I do.
So it's
nothing like the right wing here.
Right. So it's a terminology issue, right? It's not, you guys are just using a different definition than I am. That's what's happening, right?
Yeah. We're using the actual political science, which, by the way, Mr. I also have a degree in political science. You should know that it's a term issue compared to an actual party issue.
That's like a personal attack. You would be.
It was a personal
banned from
attack.
my group if
You
that-
frustrate me with this whole topic because you know better.
I'm not. I mean, we can just say it's a semantic issue, but I'm not entirely convinced that you're libertarian.
I don't think your libertarian party is very cohesive though, because didn't what's her name, Jorgensen?
Oh, I'm not a libertarian party. No,
isn't she on the ticket as a libertarian?
But that's party libertarianism. We're talking about ideological libertarianism.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Okay.
There's a complete difference.
Okay, because I was going to say cancel culture. The right wing is completely canceling her at the moment because she came out in support of Black Lives Matter, and they were like, "Oh hell no, f you, I'm out."
Yeah.
So
the Libertarian Party, the left-wing libertarian, where most of us are Democrats or Green Party people. We either trying to strengthen the Green Party or we're in the Dem Party trying to make sure they don't fucking make sure I can still buy
So let me ask you a question. How is
my
a left-wing libertarian different than a democratic socialist?
That's what I was going to say.
Well, I mean, democratic socialism is still, it's a benevolent authoritarianism, and not all authoritarianism is bad. Say what?
No, there's also some, there's some social authoritarianism within that movement.
That's what I'm saying. Is that you do have, that's true too. But, if you're looking for a hard distinction, like you might get somebody who would be in those spheres who might be a little bit more comfortable saying, hey, you know what, like this is actually what's true and correct, and you should go this route, and this should be something that the government promulgates, and it should be the kind of the attitudes that we in authority want to impress upon those who are not in authority. And that might be, again, good and moral, but when you're talking about pure left libertarianism, if everybody gets healthcare, everybody gets UBI, and you think about a society where if you get canceled, it doesn't matter because you ain't going to starve. If you get a society where if you get ostracized, doesn't matter, you're not going to starve, you'll be okay. The type of social pressure that you can leverage against people from an authoritarian standpoint, like in an authoritarian paradigm, you're just screwed. Like if they just decide, if the government decides, if the masses decide, hey, you know what, like you're bad, like your skin color, your attitude, your sexual preference, whatever they just randomly decide you can't do, you're kind of out.
You're saying this is democratic socialism?
No, well, no. What I'm saying is the distinction is in a purely left libertarian sense, if you're just getting money and services from the government and you're good, from there, it's different than having a left-leaning, more authoritarian system like your classic socialist, like Caesar Means Productions. We're going to tell you all what's up, and it's going to be for your own good.
Yeah, he's making.
Well, I mean, yeah, because then we're discussing economic systems versus leaders.
But what I'm saying is that if you're
which is why democratic socialism would make more sense, because even if we had all of those things, you're right, Nick, you can't give all that power to the government. It has to be us. We have to be that government. We have to be involved in those votes and the thinking.
Right.
Or is that really scary because of the fucking mob with cancel culture?
Well, again, that's why you don't have to worry about cancel culture in a left libertarian society, because you are basically uncancelable. Like you're still not going to starve. You're not going to be thrown in the street. If you lose your job, you'll still be okay. Like you're going to still have this kind of like network to kind of fall on. Whereas in an authoritarian system, if they decide you're out, you're just out.
In our system, automation doesn't matter. Automation doesn't matter. We embrace automation because once we have robot slaves, we could all just be rich kings living on the freaking hill. Yeah. You guys are so worried about us being productive humans.
Such a problem. I have such a problem with that UBI thing. I just feel like it's going to destroy our culture. It's going to I mean, Americans are already really, they're not virtuous people, right? And so I feel like by allowing people to do whatever,
you're still a slave.
to be lazy, and you take their purpose out of their lives, right? Because a lot of people identify themselves with their occupation.
No, that's totally toxic. That's totally toxic. That's totally toxic.
All right, so we have next week's topic because
you are such a slave.
I agree.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's just totally toxic.
Okay, so
slave. Nick's a slave.
That's a what?
It's like you're still hooked into the matrix, and you gotta pull it out, man.
But next week, that's actually honestly that's a really good topic for next week.
So,
why
don't we do that next week? We'll go with that topic. Right. I know you guys got to run to your mediocre podcast, which is great.
I don't have one.
I hope you guys have fun talking about the same thing you just talked about. Steve just leaves. Oh, okay. It's like peace. All right. So I think I'm gonna do a song because last time, what's her name? Afra criticized us because we didn't have a good send off.
He's at the club.
Okay, now YouTube's guys gotta talk over this, otherwise YouTube's gonna mark the show. We're never gonna hear any of this.
All right. Peace out, guys. It was nice.
Thank you for coming. Same time next week?
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Good night, Nick.
Since I was young, my love, and my mind because